时间快到了，我们在24个小时以内终于可以知道 Will we be unburdened from what has been, or will America be made orange again? And in the lead up to the final showdown, everybody, myself included, are watching them numbers real close. And so far, what I see is Kamala 代志大条, cause them numbers are looking juicy as fuck.
The oranges.
So today, we're not gonna talk about Kamala's mistakes or Trump's mistakes or which celebrity got paid how much to endorse Kamala Harris. Instead, we're gonna focus on cold, hard numbers. And from there, you will see why DJT is the next president that will be. And if I'm right, you can be for damn sure in the next episode, I'll be shouting from the rooftops.
I told y'all niggas, y'all thought I was playing, but I told y'all.
Not because I want him to win, but because I'm petty and love to be right. So get that popcorn ready and a calculator for this one, as we're about to take a very deep dive one more time into some numbers. Lots of numbers. Fun fact, at some point or another, every US State Department for each state will publish the voter statistics for each election, from their age, ethnicity, county, and even party affiliation. And these are the numbers we're going to talk about in this chapter. So recently, Elon posted this chart on X, showing voter registration for all 7 swing states. And as you can see, in Arizona, there's a total of 5 million registered voters, and comparing the turnout of 2024 to 2020, there's a delta of Republicans and Democrats of over 200,000. And back in 2020, Biden won Arizona by only 10,000 or so votes. Then, looking at Georgia, which Biden flipped last election, at just over 8 million voters, you have a 451K delta from 2020 to 2024, and Biden flipped it by just under 12K votes. Then in Michigan, which has a similar amount of registered voters at just over 8 million, you have a delta of 136,000, and back in 2020, Biden won it by a bigger margin of 154,000 votes. Then we get to Nevada, which has the lowest registered at under 2.5 million, and you see a delta Republicans to Dems at almost 84K. But here's the kicker. Biden only won this state by a little over 33,000 votes.
There you go.
Now let's check the recently hurricane-battered North Carolina with 7.6 million registered voters and see a fairly large delta of 290K. Now Trump won this state back in 2020 by 74K plus votes. So I'd say he still got this one in the bag.
It's true.
Then there's the most important, Pennsylvania, with the highest registered voters at just north of 9 million. And you have a huge fucking delta of 605,000, dude. And against Biden in 2020, Trump lost it by 80,000 votes. Then last but not least, you have Wisconsin at 5.4 million voters. Now Republicans have the lowest delta of 83,000. But here's the kicker. Biden barely won this state by 20,000 votes. So as you can see, in the swing states, Republicans are out in full effect, son. And the in-person voting hasn't even started yet. And that leaves one question. Exactly where does that leave Kamala?
You're in deep shit.
Now, all these are just basic voter registration stats, and I have to be real, it is very common for Americans to register for one party and end up voting for another. So let's get down to the real gritty important details, shall we? By the way, everything I'm about to show you is publicly available and can be found on the Secretary of State or State Department's website, but you gotta look hard, son. And for some of them, you even need a VPN. Shout out to ExpressVPN, yo. This is not yet pay, yo. So, comparing this year's early voting numbers to 4 years ago, back in 2020, we had the virus of unspecified origin, which forced many Americans to stay home and send their ballots in the mail. And the total at that time for early voting was just over 101 million. And looking at this year, with zero threat of a strange virus of unknown origin around, the early voting numbers are almost 83 million. That's almost 20% difference. And when we look closer at the states that publicly provided party registration data, back in 2020, Democrats outnumbered Republicans by 7 million voters. But now in 2024, that gap has shrunk to just 10% of that at 785,000. So either them woke Dems are sleeping or the Republicans have drank a couple of cans of Hongdae and are coming out in masses. But with that, now we need to get down to one state that is the most important. One state to rule them all. And if you thought what you saw in this chapter was wild, in the next chapter, you better hold on to your butts.
Hold on to your butts.
So as I mentioned before, Pennsylvania has about 9 million registered voters. And when Elon made that post, the skeptic in me wanted to be sure that he's actually right. Turns out he was way more than right, yo. So I hit up the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's Department of State website, and these fools actually had downloadable Excel sheets with their voter numbers. So this info was submitted yesterday, or technically this morning. 因为有时差, and you can see that nearly 2.2 million voters requested mail-in ballots. Now that's about 960,000 fewer than during the pandemic back in 2020. Now amongst registered voters, 3.7 million are registered Democrats, and only 1.2 million Democrats requested early voting. That's nearly 740K difference than in 2020 at 1.94 million. Now out of that 9 million registered voters, 3.7 million are registered Democrats. And back in 2020, 1.94 million requested mail-in ballots. But this year, only 1.2 million requested. That's a 740,000 difference.
You in danger, girl.
And if it hasn't already, Caramel's face is about to turn a deep cabbage green, yo. Not only that, but in the 2022 and 2020 elections, the Democrats have consistently come out at over 60% in early voting numbers. But now they're barely scraping by at 40%. 这个很难看哦。
You're fucked.
Now, let's look at the Republican side. They have about 3.7 million registered voters this year. Back in 2020, 780,000 requested mail-in ballots compared to 710,000 this year. That's barely a 70K difference. And as of right now, just over 600,000 have already turned in their ballots, trailing the Dems by a little over 410K. And the Dems still have about 2.9 million votes to turn in on election day. But Republicans have 3.1 million. And here's where things are about to get interesting. So, based on what we see here, we can conclude that Republicans have a higher preference for in-person voting compared to Democrats who prefer mail-in voting. And compared to the past two elections, just over 30% were willing to vote in person. So let's assume that this year, all things considered, it goes up to about 40%, meaning the expected turnout would be about 1.6 million out of 3.9 million, giving the Dems a total of 2.57 million votes. And with the Republicans, the polar opposite at over 50% in-person voter turnout. And if we assume that this year is exactly the same with zero changes, then out of their 3.7 million voters, at least 1.89 million would show up tomorrow. Add that in with their current mail-in vote numbers and you've got about 2.49 million red votes. And then there's that one other group, the independent voters. So in Pennsylvania, about 43.5% of voters are Democrats, but they only have 48% support in the polls. Now, about 40.5% are Republicans, and they have around the same amount of support as their Democratic counterparts. That means that out of 1.1 million independents, at least 63% would need to cast their vote red, and 37% would need to cast blue to get these numbers. And assuming a 75% turnout rate, we could guesstimate that Team Red would get around 520,000 votes from the independents, and Team Blue would get around 310,000, leaving the final tally at 2.98 million for Republicans and 2.88 million for Dems, making Pennsylvania orange by just 100,000 votes. And considering there are 210,000 fewer registered Democrats this year, it seems very, very likely.
Trust me, I'm like a smart person.
Now, to be fair, either Trump or Kamala could still win this election without Pennsylvania, but it would be hard as fuck. So if you ask me, my guess is by this time tomorrow, America will be made orange again. 这么精彩，让我们继续看下去. But until then, let me know your election predictions down below, and I will see you in a couple of days. Peace!